Okay. It's not at all awkward when I do that. I remembered to turn on this half of the microphone. I did not remember to turn on that half of the microphone. So, the other class missed all the wisdom of what I just said about Joseph Campbell and the monomyth, but they heard a less well thought out version of it yesterday, so they're probably fine. The origins of this idea are interesting, and there's a lot of different places that one can go with it. You might even, anyone familiar with Claude Levy Strauss? No. Okay. He's another one of those names that's going to get thrown at you a lot in university in a lot of different contexts. So Levi Strauss promotes this idea of a collective unconscious. Have you heard that term before? Does that sound a little bit familiar? Maybe? Okay. So collective unconscious is this idea that somehow, and it's not clear exactly how mystical he meant to be with this, not as mystical as it seems at first glance, I think, but somehow humans have a shared sort of mind, a shared unconscious mind. And this is he probably meant this in more of a biological sense in terms of things that are hardwired into us, the way that monarch butterflies can find their way to the same tree in Mexico that their grandparent was born on, right? That sort of thing. This is hardwired into us in some way. So in any case, there is something about being human that seems to be shared across cultures. And it is possible to read this. It does seem to be a fact that all the heroic myths of all of the cultures are basically the same. Like they might mix up the order of the steps a little bit. The hero obviously has a different name, but the elements of it are pretty well all there all the time. And this is explicable if one considers that the elements are the same because these are the sorts of stories that resonate with people. And so these are the stories that got remembered, that got passed on, through oral tradition over generations because they resonated with people. And so there's something about this pattern of stories that makes people feel a certain way, or that is memorable to people, or that it teaches some sort of lesson that all cultures value, perhaps. The reason for it is obviously up for debate, but the significance of it is huge. So we're talking about the 1950s, the 1960s. Joseph Campbell writes his book. His book is entitled The Hero of a Thousand Faces, meaning that it's all one hero, and he or she, sometimes it's she also, just has different faces in different cultures, but it's the same story. And some university professor may ask you to read this book at some point. I have a copy somewhere. I don't know if it's in this room or on a shelf in my house somewhere, but it's important. The idea of it is very important. Reading the entire book maybe not so important, as long as you're kind of familiar with the concepts. So some of the concepts are this: the hero they describe as an archetype, and that's important, which means that the hero is not so much an individual as he is a type of character, right? And so there is also common in these stories, there's the archetype of the the father figure. There's the archetype of the wise old mentor. There's the archetype of the goddess or the temptress. There's the archetype of the belly of the beast, which in some cases is incredibly literal, but not always. Sometimes it's more figurative or symbolic. But these are all broad types of things that recur. So in attempting to identify archetypes, then we can start to see the broader patterns among different stories. And the Hollywood aspect of this, Christopher Vogler condensed these steps down to 12 in the early 1980s when, well, I should maybe back up a little bit. Have all of you seen the original Star Wars movie? Most of you have? Okay. So even if you haven't seen it, you will know that it was hugely, hugely popular. So when it came out, it like dropped a hydrogen bomb on all previous records for movies, right? People loved it well beyond the way they'd ever loved a movie before. And it took a while for people to kind of figure out why that was, what it was about Star Wars that people loved so much. And George Lucas eventually, George Lucas was the writer and director of the first Star Wars movie. He wrote the other ones as well, but didn't direct them. He eventually admitted that he had taken Joseph Campbell's ideas about the hero of 1,000 faces and thought, what if I just wrote this story? I used the hero's journey, I used that cycle, but I set it in space with like laser swords and stuff. What if I did that? Wouldn't that be cool? And so that's exactly what he did. He followed the pattern intentionally and fairly precisely. And if you look over this list and think, you know, Luke Skywalker as the hero all the way through, you'll find like really, really close correspondence to all the elements of that movie. And so it resonated with people because they felt like it was exciting because it was science fiction and, you know, space and aliens and stuff like that, but the story was so familiar. And this guy, this Christopher Vogler figured out, if that pattern was so successful, what if we just like condensed that and made it into a formula? And then all of the action movies of the 80s and 90s and since then, and adventure movies have followed this pattern pretty exactly. And when they have a script and they're not quite sure what's wrong with it, why it isn't working, they try to make it more like the hero's journey. They try like, what if we add in the death and rebirth part of it, right? Or whatever. So the hero needs to be reborn at some point, and if you think about Star Wars, you think about Luke in the trash compactor on the Death Star, and he gets attacked by that monster, and he disappears under the water, right? And everyone thinks that he's dead. And then he rises up out of the water, and he's been symbolically died and been reborn. And this is a crucial element of the cycle. And so this is an important concept to understand just in general, but certainly for literary criticism, because we're going to take those principles, not specifically the hero's journey, but the principles of there being archetypes that we can then compare across different genres and different pieces of literature so that we have, it gives us a formula for how to look at things. And if we want to, as some critics did, if we want to, we can judge how successful a piece of literature is by how well it follows the formula, right? Or how, when it doesn't follow the formula, when it takes a detour, does it do so seemingly with intention and for a specific purpose? And so I would not be the person to argue that this is the way that we should approach literature. But if you remember from previous discussion, we've been trying to, in terms, not we in this classroom, but in terms of the history of literary scholarship, we've been trying to think of ways to make it more scientific, make it something that is more precise and less wishy-washy opinions about feelings, right? So this is a way that we can apply more precision to the study of literature. Again, it's not my preferred way, but it's a way that we need to be aware of. So, any questions about what I've said so far?